Hey, rock fan and freaks, thank you for joining the It's One Louder podcast. My name is PJ Pat, and this episode is particularly aimed at all you rock musicians out there, specifically all you guitar players out there. I found this article talking about Fender, the CBS era, in the latest Guitarist magazine. Very cool article. So for those of you who don't know, Fender, I guess it's a toss-up which is the top brand in guitar, whether it's Gibson or Fender. I personally think it's Fender because Leo came out with the first solid-bodied guitar, so I think he deserves the mantle for that. Leo Fender, the legend himself. I'm a big fan, obviously, of Fender. I got my George Harrison Beatles replica guitar when they did the last concert on the rooftop. George Harrison pretty much played a guitar that looked very similar to this one, and as soon as I saw this, I just had to get it. Good old trustworthy Telecaster. The Telecaster came out in 1950, pretty much 4 years after Leo Fender founded Fender Musical Instruments. Came up with this first solid body guitar. Believe it or not, when Leo Fender started the company, he was actually working on amps and lap steel guitars, and only after a couple of years started working on experimenting on solid body guitars. I guess it's still a classic, you know. Classics never die. And then 4 years later, 1954, this iconic guitar came along right here, the Strat, aka Stratocaster. This one, personally, it means a lot to me. My wife got this for me on my 40th birthday, so 10 years ago, pretty much. This came out, and they were called the Shaw Buckers because Tim Shaw is a very famous pickup designer. I think he came from Gibson, or he worked for Gibson for a couple of years. And Tim Shaw, very, very coveted pickup designer, I should say. And Fender was able to snatch him up for a couple of years. And this guitar was the first year where they came up with Tim Shaw's design of the humbucker. So they actually call this guitar the Shaw Bucker. And man, I absolutely love this thing. If you can check out the nut here, it is actually stainless steel versus, the, plastic or ebony type of nut. And since then, they haven't really come out with this stainless steel nut anymore. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if they think it affects the sound, but I absolutely love this thing. This thing is a workhorse. It's got locking tuners, and man, you just really can't go wrong. It keeps in tune perfectly. You know, sometimes I won't play this guitar for a couple of months and then come back to it and it's just turned perfectly. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of the Strat. For me, the neck of the Strat just feels so much more comfortable than, let's say, a Les Paul. Don't get me wrong, I love Gibsons. I mean, the sound of a Les Paul is really unmatched when it comes to rock and roll and playing heavy music. But for me, what takes the cake with Fender is the feel and comfort of the neck. I don't know, it just feels like home to me, compared to me playing a Les Paul. I just feel so much more comfortable playing a Fender neck, with their design. And they have obviously all kinds of variety, D shape, C shape, D to C, all this stuff. But, for a Strat, in particular, nothing beats it for me. So this is definitely my desert island guitar if I were to pick one. All right, the article's called The Big Deal with an amazing Strat right there. Look at this. Unbelievable. All right, you ready to get into this? Let's do this.
Welcome to the It's One Louder podcast. Your host, PJ Pat, has done absolutely nothing that you would know about.
All right, the article is called The Big Deal, Fender's CBS Era, with this beautiful, beautiful traditional coffee mug Strat. Look at that. Nice wear and tear there. Okay, so 1965, the year that the giant CBS Corporation bought Fender. For many, that moment marks the start of rot setting in at California's finest electric guitar maker. So for a lot of guitar collectors and musicians and rock stars that can afford classic Fenders, the pre-CBS era is the best. So like I said, Leo Fender started Fender Musical Instruments back in 1946, and in 1965, that's when CBS purchased his company. And a lot of people say that that was the beginning of the end in terms of quality control and not really meeting the standards that Leo Fender had set for his guitars. And so if you talk to a lot of collectors and a lot of people who know what's going on, they definitely look at pre-1965 Fenders as the holy grail type of Fenders. I'm sure you've heard the 59s are the top premium holy grail type of guitars within that pre-CBS era. But this article focuses on the area that CBS purchased them from 1965 and on. And let's just see what was going on at Fender at that time. 1965, the year that the giant CBS Corporation bought Fender. For many, that moment marks the start of rot setting in at California's finest electric guitar maker. But is that judgment fair? A fresh look at the early years of CBS ownership, 60 years on, reveals a more nuanced picture, one that helps us properly understand Fender's place at the eye of the rock and roll hurricane that was transforming American culture. We join historian Tony Bacon and guitar restorer Hugh Price to learn why post-CBS Fenders deserve more kudos than they sometimes receive. Words: Tony Bacon, Jamie Dixon, and Hugh Price. Photography: Phil Barker. Rising tide. During its long history, Fender has navigated several tricky turning points, but 1965 marks for some the start of a decline from the standards set by Leo's original company. Is that view still justified? Words: Tony Bacon. Photography: Phil Barker. By 1964, Fender was a few years away from its 20th anniversary. Business was strong, and fine guitars and amps continued to pour from the company's Fullerton factories in California. Around 600 people worked there, the majority in manufacturing, spread across the 29 buildings that had appeared as demand grew through the years. Forrest White, in charge of production, recalled that by the end of '64, his workers were making 1,500 guitars a week, compared with just 40 a week when he joined Leo's small setup 10 years earlier. As well as the electrics and amps, Fender's catalogs and price lists from the mid-'60s also featured acoustics, effects, accessories, and Fender Rhodes electric pianos. Wow, no idea they made pianos. Rondell, who headed the sales side of Fender, remembered writing $1 million worth of wholesale business during his first year in the 50s, but by the mid-'60s, he had helped multiply that figure by 10, which in turn translated to about $40 million worth of retail sales. The beat boom, triggered by the Beatles and the so-called British invasion, had begun its sweep across America. In short, electric guitars were at a peak of popularity, and Fender was just about their biggest and most successful producer. Then in January 1965 came the big surprise. The Music Trades, the prime American magazine for the instruments and industry, was clearly shocked by the news of Fender's acquisition by the mighty Columbia Broadcasting System, Inc., better known as CBS. The purchase price of $13 million is by far the highest ever offered in the history of this industry for any single manufacturer, it reported. Wow, that's just chump change right now at this point. The acquisition, a sterling proof of the music industry's growth potential, marks the first time that one of the nation's largest corporations has entered our field. With sales volumes in excess of $500 million annually, CBS currently does more business than the entire U.S. musical instrument industry does at retail. Actual purchase of Fender was made by the Columbia Records distribution division of CBS, whose outstanding recent feats have included the production of My Fair Lady. Wow, I wonder what the big vision was for the executives at CBS at the time. To purchase an instrument manufacturer, let alone an electric guitar instrument manufacturer, just seems so out of their comfort zone and of their expertise. Okay, back to the article. This was at a time when economy wonks were busy advising big corporations like CBS to diversify and gobble up firms from a variety of different businesses. There you go. That answers my question. It's not hard to imagine their advice. Finance and streamline the new acquisitions, and rich pickings will follow. That seems to be what Goddard Lieberson, the boss of Columbia Records, thought. He described Fender as a fast-growing business tied into the expanding leisure time market, and said he expected the industry to grow by 23% in the next couple of years. So why did Fender sell up? Leo Fender was by all accounts a hypochondriac. Randall said he was a faddist and that he would regularly go on what he called health kicks. And it was Leo's health worries, notably the staph infection in his sinuses that troubled him for many years, that led to Leo's decision to sell Fender, along with nervousness about expanding the company further. Looking back later, he said he felt he wasn't going to be in good enough health to be able to carry on. All right, I'm not going to read the entire article. I'm just going to pick and choose the interesting bits. But fun fact to know, American sales of guitars during 1965 at 185 million, up from 24 million in 1958. Wow, what could possibly go wrong, it says. Meanwhile, back in California, as you might imagine, this change of ownership was not universally applauded by the factories and offices in Fullerton. There seems to have been a clash of cultures. The new CBS people, often trained engineers with college degrees, had a firm belief in high-volume production. Fender's old guard, meanwhile, were long-serving craft workers without formal qualifications. Anyone who noticed a particular job advert in the Los Angeles Times would be forgiven for thinking that it summed up the changes underway. The ad was for a systems analyst to oversee a computer feasibility study at Fender for a management information system, quote-unquote, covering sales order processing, material control, manufacturing systems, and accounting systems. They want to run the place with computers. Whatever next? George Fullerton, who had various roles at Fender, said management was first alerted to criticisms when the firm's sales reps began to feed back complaints from their dealers. They'd say the guitars don't play like they used to. They aren't adjusted like they used to be, Fullerton remembered. One of the top sales reps at the time, Dale Hyatt, he said it got to a point where he didn't enjoy going into stores anymore because he regularly found himself defending some poor piece of workmanship. They got very sloppy in the finish, with far too many bad spots, Hyatt recalled. They created their own competition, letting the door wide open for everybody else, including the Japanese. I guess it was more of an issue back then. You know, you had to compromise between scaling up and the high quality of your instruments. You know, it's not like today where there's really, really high quality robots and technology that can really manage the quality control of a manufacturing of an instrument like a guitar. But back then, that technology didn't exist, so it must have been a tricky situation trying to produce more while maintaining that same quality. The other problems that existed were multiple, Randall added. After interviewing all my people, they wrote job descriptions for everybody. We didn't need that sort of thing. We knew what we were doing, and I have to admit it wasn't a very sophisticated operation we had, but it worked. But they divided everything into its cost center down to the last nut, bolt, and screw. We had more cost centers than you could ever imagine. Everything had to be moved from one cost center to another cost center for corporate bookkeeping. The burden became horrendous. Wow, ain't that the story, eh? How many times have you heard this story? A big corporation takes over a mom and pop shop that focus on quality and relationships with customers throughout the years. And the big guy comes in, gobbles them up, and pretty much turns everything into red tape, puts them through the corporate grinder, and you come up with this unmotivated staff pumping out very average product and not really caring about it. I guess things just never change. These job descriptions complicated things further too. Everyone went back to work, Randall recalled, and they'd be saying, "Don't tell me to do that. That's not my job." Before everyone worked as a team, pushed the product through. Anything that went wrong, it was, "Well, that's not my job. You take care of it." This led to a lot of problems. Working for big American companies in my day job, I've seen that time and time again where someone comes in and tries to put everything down on an Excel spreadsheet and tries to justify everything based on the numbers, not really understanding the intangibles and what it takes to work as a team. It was in 1969 when Randall resigned from CBS and he went off to form Randall Electric Instruments. Wow. And that's actually a pretty well-known brand. Crazy how it was kind of a spin-off from Fender. I had no idea about that. Very cool. He was by no means the only one of the original team to leave. CBS retained Leo Fender services as a special consultant in research and development. The corporation's confidential pre-sale report into Fender concluded that Randall was a necessity to run the business, but not Leo. It said a competent chief engineer could move products forward, but that it would be the highly desirable and at least for a period of 4 to 5 years to maintain the active interest and creativity of Mr. Fender. In other words, they didn't want Leo taking his ideas elsewhere, but didn't particularly want him getting in the way of the newly efficient Fender production machine. So they set him up anyways from the main buildings, where he was allowed to tinker as much as he liked with little effect on the product. Man, talk about a way to kill creativity, and from the guy who actually came up with the damn thing in the first place. Damn shame, I say. Damn shame, CBS. Damn shame. A couple of years later, after the sale to CBS, Leo found a new doctor who put him on antibiotics and cured his sinus complaint. He completed a few projects for CBS, but left when his 5-year contract expired in 1970, going on to spearhead Music Man and then G&L. That is right. Leo then spun off and formed G&L Guitars, and I think they're still around. Unfortunately, they didn't have the machine behind them in terms of marketing. So Fender, obviously, right now is a much, much, much more well-known and popular brand, and you rarely see G&L in guitar shops anymore, even hear of G&L anymore. I'm not sure, what the transition was when Leo passed and who took it over. If his sons took over or his kids, I'm not sure. But yeah, that's too damn bad, Okay, so here's the eternal debate. Maybe not so eternal for a lot of you. Pre-CBS versus CBS. In the vintage Fender world, pre-CBS has a magical ring about it and increasingly unreal prices. And yet no one is likely to suggest that, say, a Tele made towards the end of 1964 is going to be much different from one made in the early months of 65. Nonetheless, that first one would be tagged as pre-CBS, in other words, made before the takeover of Fender by CBS. The one shipped in early 65, however, is a CBS. Many will agree that over a period of time after the sale, CBS introduced changes to the production methods at Fender, and that a number of those changes were detrimental to the quality of some instruments. Fender's production and sales certainly increased and profits went up. Randall recalled income almost doubling in the first year that CBS owned Fender. Leo said he didn't think the changes made by Fender had lowered Fender quality. They weren't trying to cheapen the instrument, he told Guitar Player in 1978. Maybe they tried to accelerate production, but it was natural for them to do that because on one instrument alone, I think it was a Mustang, we were backordered something like 150,000 units. On a backorder of that size, and there were others too, you can't just sit around. Psychedelia and cost-cutting. Around 1967, Fender changed the control wiring of the Telecaster, altering the unusual circuit that had been used since 1952. Now the Tele operated as you'd expect for a 2-pickup guitar. The 3-way selecting rear pickup, both or neck, along with a regular master volume and tone. Also in 67, Fender's budget line for beginners gained the Bronco, another relatively straightforward guitar with single pickup and basic vibrato bridge, and with Fender's medium 24-inch scale. At first, it was also offered as a set with a little matching Bronco amp. Oh, neat. The following year, Psychedelia hit Fender. The company's designers had fun with self-adhesive paisley and floral pattern wallpaper, presumably to increase flower power appeal. The paisley red and blue flower Telecasters could hardly be described as examples of a boring approach to guitar design by CBS. Fender's high-gloss, thick-skin polyester finish, which started to appear in the late 60s, would become a characteristic design of a 70s Fender. Pre-CBS guitars were customarily painted with nitrocellulose lacquers, but CBS considered poly as a better and safer option with his drive for expanded production. Oh, so that's where all that paisley design comes from, that whole flower power movement in the early 70s. I had no idea about that. You see that now. They release certain guitars with that paisley look. It's kind of a flowery, I guess, come to think of it, yeah, it is kind of a flowery design. It looks good on certain guitars, and no idea it came from this, so pretty cool to know. A clear sign of the new owner's cost-cutting came in the unusual shapes of two short-lived Bitster models, the Swinger and the Custom, jigsawed together from unused parts that CBS did not want to waste. Wow! For the Swinger, aka Arrow or Musiclander, Simney put together Music Master, Bass V, and Mustang parts, adding a curve to the body base and shaving the headstock into an arrowhead. For the 6-string Custom, aka Maverick, he carved electric, 12 in Roman numerals, to a revised shape, adding a Mustang vibrato and a 12 neck. Neither lasted long in Fender's lines. You can't blame him for trying to be creative while trying to save costs at the same time. Meanwhile, a feeling was setting in amongst guitarists that Fenders and other American guitars were not made like they used to be. More musicians were being seen playing old guitars, which were starting to be called vintage instruments, alongside a growing impression that numbers might now be more important to Fender than quality. Yeah, and I'm sure that's when, like the article said earlier, that's when the Japanese probably started making a mark too, and more well-known guitar players started playing Japanese. Not sure when Ibanez started, but I'm guessing around then. That attitude has softened in decades since, and while pre-CBS guitars certainly can be great instruments for those able to afford them, the musical worth of many late 60s Fenders is now much better understood. Around the time he bought his 56 Brownie Strat, Eric Clapton was clearly an early convert to the idea, declaring in a 1967 issue of Melody Maker, "When you're starting, always buy a second-hand guitar because it will be broken in, quote-unquote, and easier to play, apart from the fact that the older the guitar, the better it seems to have been made." Contrast that with an image of Jimi Hendrix creating a supreme interpretation of the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock a few years later, performed on his 1968 white Strat. It may be a cliche, but let's say it anyway. Jimmy didn't do too badly with the CBS Fenders. I guess if you put it that way, that idea goes out the window. And how does all this sit today? As ever, with any guitars you want to try or to compare, there's only one test that matters. Of course, have a look at them, have a feel, plug them in, play them. If you're lucky, you could set up a blindfold test with a pre-CBS and an early CBS Tele or whatever model you favor. It's the sort of thing that can have surprising results and upset long-held beliefs and suppositions. But we'll leave that kind of thing to your hands, your ears, and your head. It's personal after all. Absolutely. I can definitely see where this article is coming from, and the notion of vintage is better. James Hetfield, I read an interview, that's kind of his philosophy as well. Vintage is better. But for just regular players like us and regular average musicians and, that has day jobs, man, at the end of the day is number one, it's not even how the guitar feels. Number one, it's how the guitar looks. Because that's the number one thing you're attracted to is the look of the guitar. The shape of it, the color, the color of the pick guard, how the neck is. It's just, some people just love Flying V's or love Explorers. They don't care exactly if the neck is perfect for them or not. No, they just want to play a freaking Flying V. I've been there. I have a Flying V, and that's probably one of the reasons why I bought it. First of all, I wanted a Flying V, and second of all, the one I have looks super damn dope. Is the neck the most comfortable thing? No. Is it as comfortable as this? No. But I love playing that guitar, and I just have so much fun playing that guitar, and I love seeing it on me and just playing it and rocking out. So that, at the end of the day, that's all that matters, And like I said, nowadays, for 600 guitars, you can get a pretty damn good guitar. Just the way things are made now and all the quality control with all the robotic systems and machines and computers. It's pretty damn hard to get a shitty guitar right now for a very good price. So think about that. Don't let that discourage you. It's just fun to read this kind of articles. There you go. I hope you enjoyed that little tidbit of Fender history. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. By the way, if you do think that this cap is kind of cool and want to show the world your love and passion for rock and roll, definitely check out its1louder.com. That's ITS, the number 1louder.com, where you can grab this cap and other rock and roll gear. And I really appreciate it because you'd be supporting the show. Thank you. Rock on, One Louder.